Three Mexican cartel bullies a female truck driver. Not knowing she is a retired Green Beret, black SUVs prowled onto a highway under the cover of night, their headlights slicing through the darkness. Their target? A lone trucker hauling freight across the desert. They thought she was just another easy mark, another driver to extort or eliminate. What they didn't realize was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because behind the wheel of that Peterbilt 389 wasn't just any trucker. It was a former Green Beret and one of the most dangerous combat veterans alive. And tonight, the hunters were about to become the hunt. Before we dive into this action-packed ride, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. If you love stories of courage, justice, and unstoppable heroes, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now let's hit the road. Evelyn Blake had always preferred the open road. At 37, she had spent the past 5 years as an independent truck driver, navigating long highways and endless landscapes, far removed from the chaos of war. Before this, she had lived a very different life, one spent in the dust and fire of Afghanistan as a Green Beret, executing covert operations behind enemy lines. She had seen and done things that most people couldn't imagine, things that left invisible scars. The solitude of trucking had given her something she never thought she would find again: peace. Her life followed a simple rhythm now: long hours on the highway, quiet stops at roadside diners, and the occasional conversation with fellow truckers over CB radio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Out here, there were no orders, no chains of command, just her rig, and the open road. But recently, something had changed. She started hearing whispers over the radio, stories of truckers going missing, rigs abandoned on desolate stretches of highway. Drivers spoke in hushed tones about black SUVs tailing independent operators, about hijackings that didn't seem like ordinary robberies. Some called it bad luck, others cartel trouble. Evelyn had seen enough in her past life to know the difference between random crime and an organized effort. At first, she kept her distance. She wasn't looking for trouble. She had left violence behind when she traded her rifle for the driver's seat of a Peterbilt. But then the trouble found her. Evelyn Blake pressed onward through the night on Highway 87, her Peterbilt 389 slicing through the darkness with its powerful headlights. The vast Texas landscape lay silent around her, bathed in the silver light of a waning moon. She had hauled cargo countless times before. Tonight it was auto parts destined for a shop in San Antonio. But something about the stillness felt off. The only sound in her cabin was the low hum of the diesel engine, punctuated by the occasional crackle of the CB radio. Up ahead, the highway stretched into oblivion, and she should have taken some comfort in the emptiness. Instead, she felt her instincts prickling at the edges of her consciousness. Checking her side mirrors, she noticed the same 4 dark SUVs that had been following her for the last 20 miles. They maintained a steady distance and speed, far enough to avoid suspicion by normal standards. But Evelyn knew better. She had first spotted them a while back, faint silhouettes against the night sky. Over 20 miles, they never drifted off or tried to pass, and that told her everything she needed to know. This was no coincidence. Something about the formation reminded her of convoys she had once encountered in Afghanistan, where she had served as a Green Beret. Situations that often led to roadside ambushes or sudden, brutal firefights. She pushed away the memories of dust and sand, of her squad mates calling out positions in tense whispers. Now the battlefield was an American highway, and her mind flicked through 100 possible threats. She refused to call the cops. It wasn't that she mistrusted all law enforcement, but rumor had it that the cartel bribed or intimidated local officers, and the last thing she wanted was to tip off the very people who might be working with these SUVs. Instead, Evelyn would rely on her own training and instincts. If they wanted to push her off the road, they'd find out she wasn't just another hapless truck driver. She steadied her grip on the wheel and kept her foot on the accelerator, determined to maintain her speed for now. A sudden static burst crackled over the CB radio, startling her. The midnight hush in her cabin shattered, replaced by a low male voice speaking in English tinted with a Mexican accent. "Pull over now, lady truck driver," the voice said, calm but cold. "We just want to talk." Evelyn felt her heart rate spike, not out of fear, but out of readiness. She'd heard these lines before, in another language and another land, when men with rifles promised safe conduct if you cooperated. Typically, that talk ended in betrayal and gunfire. She let her lips twist into a wry grin as she stared at the open road. "I've heard that one before," she muttered under her breath. She made no move to slow her truck, no attempt to pick up the mic. Whatever they had to say, she wasn't interested. Through the CB speaker, the man's voice hard. "Pull over, or we will make you stop." Right on cue, one of the SUVs surged ahead, its engine roaring as it matched the speed of her cab. The passenger side window slid down, revealing the muzzle of an AK-47. A burst of gunfire shattered the night. Bullets pinged off the thick metal at the front of her truck, one stray shot striking the windshield in a spiderweb of cracks. Evelyn kept her breathing, even. Clearly, they wanted to scare her into stop. They weren't ready to kill her yet. Or maybe they weren't skilled enough to aim well at these speeds. Either way, she didn't plan to wait around and find out. She pressed harder on the gas, coaxing the Peterbilt up to 80 miles per hour. Behind her, two more SUVs accelerated, flanking either side of the trailer. A glance in the rear view told her they were trying to hurt her, maybe forcing her to brake or swerve. But she'd been in worse situations. The first time she had encountered a roadside ambush, she'd been a rookie in a foreign desert. Now, she was in her home country, driving a vehicle that weighed nearly 40 tons. The men in those SUVs likely had no idea just how dangerous she could be. Evelyn began mapping out her next move. She spotted a stretch of highway ahead, where the terrain sloped down to a guardrail. It wasn't ideal, but it offered possibilities. One of the SUVs had crept up on her left, close enough that she could see the gunman inside. Busy reloading, they must have thought she would eventually fold under the intimidation. Instead, she twitched to the left, abruptly ramming the heavy steel flank of her trailer against their smaller vehicle. The metal shrieked, and the SUV spun sideways. The driver lost control as the vehicle crashed hard into the rail, grinding sparks before toppling over. She didn't linger to see the outcome. Her eyes flicked to the right side mirror. 3 SUVs remained, now obviously furious. They gunned their engines, one cutting around to get ahead of her. She braced herself, anticipating their next move. They might try to box her in or blow out her tires. Up ahead, the highway curved around a steep cliff, edges falling away into darkness. Evelyn realized she could use that to her advantage. The second SUV swooped forward, aiming to force her to brake. She feigned compliance, easing up on the gas. The SUV sped up, positioning itself in front of her. At the right moment, she slammed the accelerator again, letting the Peterbilt's massive front end tap the rear corner of the SUV. Caught off guard, the driver overcorrected, sending the SUV veering sideways. Evelyn watched in the side mirror as it spun across the lane. She heard the screech of tires, the frantic attempt to regain control, and then saw the vehicle plummet over the cliff edge. The swirling headlights vanished into the dark chasm. 2 down, 2 to go. Yet the last pair of SUVs seemed to wizen up, dropping back to a safer distance. She imagined the frantic radio chatter in those vehicles, how they couldn't believe a single truck driver had taken out 2 of their heavily armed crews in just a few moments. They wouldn't give up, though. Cartels rarely did. Through the CB radio, a different voice now spoke, deeper, colder. "You just made a big mistake, Lady Trucker. El Lobo will know your name." Evelyn didn't bother responding. She didn't need to know who El Lobo was to guess she'd just poked a hornet's nest. The final 2 SUVs hung back for a minute, their headlights bobbing in the blackness. Then, one slowed drastically, as though the driver had decided it wasn't worth continuing the chase. The other lingered for a moment, its high beams flicking on to blind her. Evelyn narrowed her eyes against the glare, but stayed her course. Finally, that last SUV also dropped away, letting her drive on unimpeded. She kept her guard up for several more miles, half expecting an ambush around each bend, but the highway remained empty, silent except for her engine's steady rumble. Eventually, the adrenaline rush began to ebb, leaving her with a knot of tension in her shoulders and an underlying realization that tonight had changed everything. Before, she had tried to remain neutral, hoping the rumors of hijackings and cartel intimidation wouldn't reach her. Now they had singled her out, and she had answered with force. There would be consequences. She glanced over the damage to the truck as best she could from the driver's seat. One side mirror was cracked, the windshield spiderwebbed from a bullet impact. Still, it held, and the engine hummed as reliably as ever. She considered pulling over to assess the damage more thoroughly, But her better judgment told her to keep going until she found a safer spot, a well-lit station or a small town. She had no illusions that she was truly safe anywhere on Highway 87 now. But at least she could reach the next outpost of civilization. Up ahead, she saw the faint glow of lights on the horizon. Perhaps a rest stop or the outskirts of a town. She kept the truck at a brisk pace, scanning the area with a seasoned eye. The SUV pair might have given up for the night, but they could have called for back. She could imagine more goons lying in wait, ready to finish what the first crew had started. But for the moment, the road was calm, the only sound the rolling of tires on asphalt. Evelyn allowed herself a brief exhale, not exactly a sigh of relief, but a release of some tension. She replayed the chase in her mind, the muzzle flashes, the rattling gunfire, the shriek of metal as two SUVs were taken out. She remembered the sense of clarity she used to feel when an operation began, how everything else faded, leaving only the mission. Tonight, that mission had been survival, plain and simple. Slowing down as she neared the lights, she mentally cataloged her next steps. She'd need to refuel, fix the mirror, maybe patch up the windshield if she could. More importantly, she had to figure out a plan. The men in those SUVs would likely report to their boss, this so-called El Lobo. She had no doubt he'd respond with force, and if they had connections in law enforcement, she couldn't rely on official help. Evelyn's thoughts turned to the network of other independent truckers she'd sometimes heard about. A handful of them had banded together to share tips and warnings about hijackings and road hazard. Perhaps she could reach out to them, gather more information, or at least give a heads up that the cartel was getting bolder. She had no desire to form some kind of militia. She'd had her fill of conflict in Afghanistan. But if it came down to defending not just herself, but innocent drivers, she would do what was necessary. As the glow of a small town came into clear view, she decided she would pull in, find a place to park for the night, and assess the bullet holes in the truck. The run-in with those SUVs had proven one thing. If the cartel believed they could bully her off the road, they were wrong. They had just learned that Evelyn Blake, the quiet woman behind the wheel of a Peterbilt, was far more than she seemed. Still, as the lights of the gas station illuminated her damaged windshield, she felt no triumph. It wasn't over. She could sense it in her bones, a whisper from that old soldier's instinct, telling her that those men would return with greater numbers, bigger guns, and more vicious tactics. Next time, she might not have the advantage of surprise. Next time, they wouldn't underestimate her. Evelyn Blake rolled into the dirt parking lot of Rose's Diner, just as the first rays of dawn began to pierce the eastern sky. The building itself was modest, single-story, fading paint, a buzzing neon sign that blinked words open 24 hours. Though she had often parked here to grab a meal or catch some shut-eye, this morning felt unsettlingly different. After the violent chase on Highway 87, she had driven through the night, stopping only when it became obvious she needed information, rest, and a plan. The diner's lot was populated by only 2 other trucks. A quick, practiced sweep of her surroundings showed no ominous SUVs lurking about, but that didn't assuage her caution. She cut the engine and took a moment to scan the perimeter, her eyes sharpened by years of Green Beret training. No telltale glint of a sniper scope, no silhouettes in tinted windows. For now, it looked safe, or at least safer than the open road. With a quiet exhale, Evelyn exited the cab, adjusting her jacket to conceal her sidearm. She didn't expect trouble inside this place, but after the events of last night, any notion of absolute safety had vanished. Pushing open the diner's glass door, she immediately noticed the atmosphere was off. Rose's Diner was usually a laid-back spot where truckers traded stories about mechanical breakdowns, near-miss accidents, or local rumors. Today, hush hung in the air, blanketing the handful of patrons in a shared sense of unease. Men in dusty caps stared into their coffee mugs. A woman in a threadbare jacket picked at her breakfast without appetite. If any friendly greetings were on the tip of someone's tongue, they died the instant Evelyn entered. From behind the counter, Rosa Delgado approached with her usual grace. She was a stout woman, mid-50s, with kind eyes and a knack for remembering the smallest details about her customers, yet her expression was etched with worry. No bright, good morning, no welcoming smile, just a nod that told Evelyn something serious had gone wrong. "Morning," Evelyn said softly, easing onto a stool at the counter. Rosa managed a meager smile and reached for the coffee pot. "Rough night out there," she asked, though the tension in her voice suggested she already knew something. Evelyn simply nodded, letting a beat of silence linger. She could sense that Rosa was gathering her thoughts, perhaps trying to decide how much to say. Finally, Rosa poured a steaming cup, then leaned in, lowering her voice so none of the other patrons could hear. Rosa's diner was never so quiet at dawn. Normally, a few drivers would be chattering away, telling stories of roadside breakdowns or cursing the cost of diesel. But this morning, everyone seemed lost in their own heads, shoulders hunched as though expecting a blow. Evelyn sipped her coffee, scanning the men in booths kept their eyes on their plates, while a pair of weary travelers sat in a corner, glancing nervously toward the windows. The tension felt almost palpable, thick enough that you could slice it with a knife. Rosa, meanwhile, looked like she hadn't slept a wink. Her apron was wrinkled, and worry lines creased her face. "You hear anything about last night's trouble?" she eventually asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Some folks on the CB said they heard gunshots on 87. Evelyn avoided a direct answer. "A lot can happen on these roads," she said, lips tightening. Rosa didn't push it. Instead, she moved closer, and in the hush of the diner, Evelyn could almost feel Rosa's heart pounding. After a tense pause, Rosa set the coffee pot down, slid a mug in front of Evelyn, and leaned across the counter. "Diego," she began, her gaze darting from Evelyn's eyes to the floor. "Diego Santos, he's gone." Evelyn blinked. Diego Santos was a name she recognized immediately. He was a young driver, brimming with optimism, who often joked about one day running his own fleet. She'd spoken to him a couple of times, admired his enthusiasm. The thought of him simply vanishing was unthinkable. "What do you mean, gone?" Rosa hesitated, as if saying the words made them more real. "They found his body in his truck yesterday morning," she finally meant. "Parked on the side of the highway, just outside town, 2 bullets to the head." She paused, her voice catching. It was the cartel. Evelyn felt her stomach knot, her hand clenching around the coffee mug. The gesture made it tremble slightly against the countertop. This wasn't some random theft or road rage incident. It was an execution, cartel style. Word had been spreading that certain criminal organizations were demanding protection fees from independent truckers. Diego, it seemed, had refused to pay, and now he'd paid the ultimate price. They wanted to send a message. Rosa continued, her voice trembling with anger and sorrow. "Anyone who won't bend ends up like him." Evelyn's anger flared like a spark thrown onto dry tinder. She set the mug aside, controlling her breath. Anger she could handle. It was a familiar emotion. Fear, on the other hand, would do nothing but paralyze her. "Do the police know anything?" she asked. Rosa's bitter laugh told her enough. "Police? Half of them are in someone's pocket. The rest are too scared to do anything. So no, not a damn thing." Evelyn glanced around the diner. Conversations were muted, eyes downcast. These weren't people ignoring her. They were people who had lost hope. The man at the nearest booth turned his head away when their gazes nearly crossed. Another driver appeared on the verge of leaving altogether, shifting nervously in his seat. The hush was deafening. Finally, an older trucker in a tattered cap spoke in a hoarse whisper, addressing no one in particular. "We'd best steer clear. They're too strong. Seen it happen before. People vanish. Trucks destroyed." As if on cue, a younger man in a neighboring booth mumbled that he might switch routes or even find a different line of work. The fear was palpable. The cartel hadn't just killed Diego Santos. They had snuffed out the spirit of an entire community of drivers. Evelyn knew that once a group collectively decided it was powerless, that resignation became a self-fulfilling prophecy. She flexed her fingers, trying to quell the urge to slam a fist down in frustration. Fear could be a crippling thing, and the cartel thrived on it. They didn't need to kill everyone, just a few, publicly and mercilessly, to show what defiance cost. The rest would fall in line. For a moment, she wondered if she should distance herself from all this. But the memory of the chase on Highway 87, the gunshot spiderwebbing her windshield, Diego's bright-eyed optimism snuffed out. These thoughts churned in her mind until her jaw clenched painfully. If no one else stepped up, the cartel would only grow bolder. Evelyn recognized a battlefront when she saw one, and right now it seemed she was one of the few who hadn't yet retreated. as she mulled over her next move. The diner's glass windows lit up with headlights. Slowly, a black SUV rolled past, engine rumbling ominously. Not a single person in the fork. The hush deepened, and Rosa moved closer to Evelyn, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. Evelyn peered out through the glass, noting that the SUV's plates didn't match local registration. The driver didn't stop. He didn't need to. Everyone inside knew they were being watched. "They're keeping tabs," Rosa murmured. "They must have heard about last night." Evelyn kept her expression neutral. She recognized a game of intimidation. It was the same kind of tactic insurgents used overseas. Appear somewhere just long enough to remind everyone that they could strike at any time. Evelyn drained the last of her coffee and stood. "If they've chosen me, I won't be cowering in a corner," she said quietly, meeting Rosa's worried gaze. "I won't wait around to be Without waiting for an answer, she picked up her things and headed for the door. Her truck awaited in the lot, a battered Warrior on 4 axles, and she would once again climb behind the wheel, determined not to be run off the road by bullies, cartel or otherwise. Evelyn's decision crystallized into action the very next day. She left Rosa's diner at dawn, engine growling to life, as she steered the Peterbilt 309 back onto Highway 87. Though her mind burned with questions, who exactly was behind all this? How widespread was their control? The more immediate concern was practical. Her fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. She had to refill soon or risk getting stranded in the worst possible environment. Yet each stop threatened to become a death trap. Late morning found her pulling into a desolate gas station a few miles east of Sierra Blanca. The sun rose high in the sky, beating down on the blacktop. As she parked next to a pump, she scanned the area for anything suspicious. The station seemed abandoned except for one SUV parked near the entrance of a small convenience store. At first glance, nothing screamed immediate danger, but she knew better than to let her guard down. She killed the engine and climbed down. Sweat beaded on her forehead, partly from the heat, partly from tension, as she began pumping diesel into the truck's massive tanks. 4 men emerged from the SUV. They were deliberate in their movements, fanning out in a subtle formation. Each had the easy posture of someone trained to move in sync. Evelyn's gut told her everything. These weren't random travelers or harmless passers-by. They looked more like mercenaries, perhaps ex-military themselves. One of them, a tall man with a scorpion tattoo on his neck, approached. He wore a half-smile that dripped arrogance. "We have a proposition for you, Lady Trucker," he said in English tinted with a Mexican accent. "We can offer protection on these roads for a small fee." Evelyn recognized the extortion game immediately. A forced partnership, all in the name of security. This was precisely how cartels slowly tightened their grip on independent operators. Calmly, Evelyn replaced the pump nozzle, shutting the fuel door on her truck. She looked the tall man square in the eye. "I handle my own protection," she said evenly. He chuckled, though the mirth didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand. This isn't a request. It's the way things work around here now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded contract, which he waved in front of her. "Sign, and you'll enjoy our good graces. Refuse." He shrugged as if that explained everything. Evelyn gave a cursory glance at the so-called contract. She spotted the logo of a front company, no doubt one of the cartel's legal veneers. She refused to reach for it. At her silence, one of the other men stepped forward, tugging aside his shirt to reveal the handle of a pistol. A wordless threat. Evelyn flicked her gaze around. 3 more men ringed the truck, effectively cutting off her exit. Inside the convenience store, the clerk pretended not to note it, too terrified to intervene. Her instincts assessed the situation. 4 men, at least 2 armed. They had probably scouted the area, confirmed no law enforcement would show up. The local cops wouldn't help anyway. She remembered the desert nights of Afghanistan, cornered by insurgents in narrow alleys. Different place, same strategy. The tall man moved closer, brandishing the contract like it was a death warrant. He reached out to grab her shoulder, to force compliance. That was his mistake. Evelyn's training didn't just vanish when she left the military. It lived in her muscles, in her reflexes, in the way she assessed angles and distances. His hand barely touched her jacket before she trapped his wrist, twisted it behind his back with a single fluid motion. He let out a strangled cry as a sickening pop signaled that she'd dislocated his shoulder. The second man went for his gun, but Evelyn was already on him. slamming the heel of her palm into his chin. The blow knocked him off balance, sending the weapon skidding under the truck. The other two rushed in, shock turning to aggression. One, a big man with shaved hair, drew a knife from his belt. He slashed at Evelyn in a wide arc, but she sidestepped, hooking her forearm around his elbow and yanking him forward. He stumbled, and she drove a knee into his stomach, causing him to double over. To finish, she hammered her forearm down across the back of his neck, toppling him face first onto the concrete. Suddenly, the second gunman, the one who had lost his pistol, recovered enough to charge at her from behind. Sensing his movement, Evelyn spun low, hooking her leg around his ankle. He tumbled forward. Before he could regain his footing, she snatched the collar of his shirt and bashed his head against the side of the pump. The clang echoed, and he slumped to the ground. Two of them were now out cold. The tall man with the scorpion tattoo kneeled, cradling his injured arm, cursing in Spanish. That left the big man who had brandished the knife. He was wounded, but not incapacitated. He staggered back to his feet, rage twisting his features. With a roar, he came at Evelyn again, but this time she sidestepped and delivered a swift kick to his chest, sending him crashing into the nearest pump. For a heartbeat, the station fell silent except for ragged breathing and pained groans. Evelyn steadied her own breath. Gun raised, she'd managed to yank it off the second man. The tall man looked up at her through sweat and fury, his face twisted in shock. A woman had just dismantled his entire team in under a minute. He raised one hand, a gesture of surrender. You don't know what you're doing," he muttered through gritted teeth. "El Lobo won't forgive this." Evelyn stepped closer, muzzle aimed at him. "Tell your boss," she said coldly. "I'm not playing by his rules." With her gun trained on the tall man, Evelyn ordered him to unlock his SUV. The keys jingled in his unsteady hand as he complied. She backed away, motioning for them to toss their phones onto the ground. She wanted to cut off any chance they had of calling for backup. Once they did, she told them to strip off their jackets. Anything that might hold weapons or identify them as part of the same crew. The beaten men glowered, but obeyed, spitting curses under their breath. Satisfied, Evelyn hopped into their SUV. For a second, she lingered, eyes scanning the interior for hidden firearms. She found a second pistol tucked under the front seat, yanking it free and dropping it on the asphalt. Then she gunned the engine. "She's stealing our car," one of them hissed, disbelief dripping from every syllable. Evelyn maneuvered out of the station at high speed, wheels squealing on the dusty pavement. She only drove a quarter-mile before pulling off onto a dirt shoulder. With purposeful efficiency, she located a small container of gasoline among the men's supply. She poured it across the seats, the dash, the trunk. Then she lit a match. A whoosh of flame sprang to life, dancing in the reflection of her determined eyes. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. This was a message. Moments later, the SUV was engulfed in fire, thick smoke curling into the sky. From a distance, she watched the men scramble, shouting in alarm as they saw their ride ablaze. Their cursing carried faintly on the wind. Evelyn calmly returned to her rig. She hoped they would remember this moment clearly. The day they tried to bully a lone female trucker, only to be beaten at their own game. Before starting her engine, she glanced one last time toward the chaos she'd created. "Tell El Lobo," she said under her breath, though they were too far to hear. "I don't play by his rules." Then she climbed back into her Peterbilt, shifted gears, and disappeared down Highway 87, fully aware that her declaration of war had just made her the cartel's top enemy. The road ahead would only grow more treacherous from here on out. But if they expected her to cower, they were bound for disappointment. Her truck rumbled away, each mile marker reminding her that she was on a collision course with a man called El Lobo, a cartel, and a system that wanted to crush anyone who didn't fall in line. Evelyn Blake, however, was no stranger to high-stakes battle. She'd survived Afghanistan. She would survive this. And if the cartel insisted on bringing the fight to her, she would make them regret ever thinking an independent truck driver could be an easy target. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support. Stay tuned, Evelyn's war is just beginning. The very next morning, word of the gas station confrontation spread like wildfire through the cartel's network. Whispers became urgent phone calls, which escalated to radio commands among the smaller gangs that worked under Diego El Lobo. Ramirez. By noon, El Lobo himself had convened a meeting in a lavishly furnished room at his primary stronghold in Rio Bravo. This was no ordinary hideout. It was a fortified compound with gleaming marble floors, guarded gates, and armed patrol. But behind the veneer of wealth, the place seethed with an undercurrent of menace. El Lobo was known for his violent temper, and today he was on the verge of eruption. Seated around him were his top lieutenants, men who controlled various aspects of his criminal empire, from drug smuggling to extortion rackets. The conversation centered on one improbable name, Evelyn Blake. A female truck driver, of all people, had dared to humiliate a squad of cartel enforcers in broad daylight. One lieutenant, a man with slicked back hair and an ostentatious gold watch, ventured a suggestion. Maybe we only need a small team. Jefe, he proposed with a smirk. Send them out to finish her quietly. El Lobo's eyes flashed with fury. Leaning forward, he rapped his knuckles on the polished table, the gold rings on his fingers glinting under the overhead lights. No, he growled, voice roughened by years of chain smoking. This isn't just about killing her. She needs to serve as an example. His lip curled in disgust. She destroyed one of our vehicles, beat my men, and refused our authority. Now everyone's talking about it. He pulled a cigar from his inner pocket, lighting it with practiced ease. Spread the word across every route in the region. That woman must be found. I want her head brought to me. Make sure every ally, every bribed official, every lookout station knows she's our top priority. No one under my dominion offers her help without paying the price. Within an hour, calls went out to crooked border patrol agents, to complicit truck stop owners, and to the scattered members of El Lobo's extended criminal network. They all received the same directive. Evelyn Blake was an enemy of the cartel. Anyone who spotted her or had information was to report immediately or risk the cartel's wrath. By late afternoon, the plan was in full swing. The order had traveled from Sierra Blanca to distant corners of the state, reaching smugglers, unscrupulous police officers, and even smaller cartels that owed allegiance to El Lobo. Overnight, the quiet, solitary life Evelyn had led on the highways became a thing of the past. Now at nearly every stop, a pair of eyes would track her, a phone would snap a photo, or a passing driver would drop an ominous hint on a private frequency. She had gone from being a nobody to the most wanted truck driver in Texas, and El Lobo relished the notion that she wouldn't evade him for long. Evelyn felt the shift in the atmosphere almost immediately. The day after she torched the cartel's SUV, she noticed that whenever she parked her Peterbilt 39, even if just to grab a meal or top off her fuel, someone was watching. In some places, she recognized the men from a distance. Cheap suits, scorpion tattoos, or the habitual scanning of crowds that betrayed a professional criminal. Other times, the watchers were more subtle. A housewife at a diner, who glanced over too frequently, a mechanic who kept fiddling with his phone the moment she appeared. It was as if a giant net had been cast across Highway 87, and she was the only fish they cared about catching. She couldn't ignore the evidence. One night, she spotted an SUV parked across the street from her motel. Headlights off, engine barely audible. By morning, the vehicle was gone, but the imprint it left in her mind lingered. If she had any lingering doubts that the cartel was making her a priority, those doubts vanished the moment she heard chatter on the CB radio. Anyone who sees that black Peterbilt, license plate, XYZ, you know who to call. Evelyn clenched her teeth. The bounty on her head had essentially been set. Determined not to be cornered easily, Evelyn began altering her route. She switched rest stops at the last minute, took alternate highways when possible, and minimized her time in public. Yet the cartel's reach proved extensive. She pulled into a small station in Sierra Blanca one morning, hoping for a quick coffee before moving on. Inside, the middle-aged attendant barely looked at her but reached for his phone, the moment her back was turned. When she exited, she glimpsed an SUV rolling out of the station in her mirrors, clearly trailing her. Later that day, she stopped at a modest roadside diner on Highway 87 for a quick lunch. She tried to blend in, wearing a cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but two men sitting near the door kept sneaking glances her way. One lifted his phone to his ear, murmured a few words, then left abruptly. Evelyn felt the prickle of tension crawl across her skin. The men weren't making a move on her yet. They were gathering intelligence, her usual stops, her schedule, the direction she traveled. By evening, she was convinced the cartel was content to observe. until they could orchestrate a decisive strike. The knowledge weighed on her like an invisible chain. She no longer possessed the freedom of an anonymous truck driver. She was a hunted woman, and the relentless scrutiny had begun to wear on her nerves. Evelyn soon discovered the cartel's methods involved more than just following her. They also pressured anyone who might assist her. Late one afternoon, she received a trembling phone call from Hank, an old friend in the trucking world. "I got a warning. Ev," they said, "if I help you in any way, I'd lose my rig, or worse." Another colleague. Travis went so far as to meet her discreetly in a truck stop parking lot after dark. His voice quivered with fear as he spoke. "Look, I've got a wife and kids. These people aren't messing around. I can't have them burning down my house. Please understand. I'm not turning my back on you by choice." On the CB radio, ominous messages crackled through. "Anybody who helps that woman will end up just like her." Hunted. The result was immediate. Drivers who once might have waved or chatted over coffee now hurried away if they saw her coming. The hush of conversation followed her into diners, and she caught people cutting short their meals, bills half paid, just to avoid her. It wasn't personal hatred. It was terror. She realized with a pang of bitterness that, from now on, she could rely on no one's help except for a few individuals she genuinely trusted. She would stand alone in this war, unless she found stronger allies. One evening, after a grueling day of evasive driving, Evelyn pulled into a secluded truck lot on the outskirts of a small desert town. She made sure no suspicious vehicles lingered, locked her cabin, and retrieved a secure satellite phone from her glove box. This phone was her lifeline to Logan Kane, a man she had once served with in the harsh deserts of Afghanistan. She dialed the encrypted number. It rang only twice before a familiar voice answered. "Blake, long time no talk. You all right?" Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, relief flooding through her. "Logan, I'm dealing with a situation. Ever heard of a man named El Lobo? I need intel." A pregnant pause. Then Logan's voice turned grave. "You sure picked a fight, didn't you? El Lobo isn't just some drug lord. He's building a paramilitary organization, ex-soldiers, advanced surveillance, political connections, the works." She swallowed hard. Why would a glorified cartel boss go that far? Is it just about controlling smuggling routes? Logan let out a mirthless laugh. No, controlling smuggling is child's play to him. He wants the entire transportation economy under his thumb, whether it's legal freight or illegal contraband, and he's got backing from bigger fish, possibly high-ranking officials. Her grip on the phone tightened. A pit formed in her stomach as she realized this was a far cry from a simple extortion racket. El Lobo was an ambitious warlord. Defeating him meant more than outsmarting thugs. It meant dismantling a network that spanned government, law enforcement, and commerce. Logan's tone sharpened as he elaborated, describing how El Lobo's men were no mere street-level enforcers. They were ex-special forces, some from overseas, others from elite Mexican units. "He's got eyes on everything," Logan said. "Drones, cell phone intercepts, even corrupt judges in his pocket. The minute you become a threat, he mobilizes like a small army." Evelyn ran a hand through her hair, feeling a twinge of old battle nerves. "And you're telling me he wants to control the entire region's economy?" "Exactly." Logan confirmed. "He's setting up a system where every truck, every shipment, every cross-border deal has to go through him. Or else, if he consolidates that, he'll be unstoppable." A grim determination settled into Evelyn's thoughts. She had hoped this ordeal was limited to a band of violent bullies. Instead, she found herself at war with something akin to a pseudo-government. "Then taking him down is more than personal," she said softly. "It's about stopping a tyrant," Logan agreed. "Don't go it alone if you can help it. I'll dig up what I can. But watch your back. Blake, these people play for keeps." The very next day, Evelyn found herself guided by cryptic text messages from Logan to an undisclosed location, a rundown eatery at the far edge of a sleepy town. The instructions were precise. Arrive after sunset, park behind the building, and enter through the back door. She complied, scanning her surroundings for cartel spies. Inside, the place was nearly empty. A flickering neon sign cast sharp shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor. At a corner table sat a woman wearing dark sunglasses, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. A steaming mug of coffee rested before her. As Evelyn approached, the woman stood, removing her glasses to reveal sharp, intelligent eyes. "Evelyn Blake," she greeted. You've been stirring up quite a storm, Evelyn nodded, taking the seat opposite her. If the FBI is already aware, then you probably know more about this situation than I do. The woman extended a hand. I'm Special Agent Olivia Reyes. And yes, I've had my eye on you for a while. She pulled a slim file out of her purse and laid it on the table. But the man you're dealing with, El Lobo, isn't just a local kingpin. He's turning into a national threat. They sized each other up. Evelyn saw the worn lines of fatigue around Rhea's eyes. This was an agent who'd spent sleepless nights trying to bring down criminals. Reyes, in turn, noticed the calm readiness in Evelyn's posture, the subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested a trained fighter. Opening the file, Reyes revealed photographs taken by surveillance teams. Some depicted El Lobo meeting with shady businessmen. Others showed cargo trucks rolling through hidden checkpoints. She tapped one grainy satellite image. This is one of his main checkpoints on highway. He's got multiple sites like this, funneling both illicit and legitimate goods. Evelyn leaned closer, recognizing certain roads, spots where she had seen suspicious vehicles in the past. He's systematically taking over the routes, she muttered. I heard about a young driver named Diego Santos, who was... She paused, anger darkening her expression. Reyes confirmed. Executed. Yes, that's how El Lobo keeps everyone in line. You cooperate, or you vanish. Evelyn's jaw tensed. So it's not just drugs, it's entire fleets of regular freight too. Exactly, Reyes. He's forcing independent shipping companies to sign on with his front businesses. He even strong-arms bigger corporations into letting him guard their shipments. People who refuse get the Diego Santos treatment. Evelyn couldn't help the surge of fury that coursed through her veins. These were truckers, hard-working men and women, who simply wanted to drive their routes and put food on the table. What about law enforcement? Or local politicians? She asked. Reyes's mouth twisted into a bitter half-smile. El Lobo has allies in high places. I suspect certain congressmen are on his payroll. That complicates any official action against him, which is why I'm here. Under the radar, Evelyn took a slow, steadying breath. So what do you want from me? Before Reyes could answer, the rumble of engines outside interrupted them. Evelyn's instincts flared. She craned her neck to see through the window. 3 black SUVs pulled up, headlights off, but engines still run. Doors opened in sync, and 7 armed men spilled onto the street, moving with a predatory confidence. Damn it, Reyes hissed, flicking the safety off her Glock. They must have traced my phone or followed me. One of the men kicked open the diner's front door, weapon at the ready. The handful of late-night patrons scattered in terror, diving under tables or bolting out the back. Evelyn ducked behind a row of wooden booths. Reyes right beside her. We need to get out of here, Evelyn muttered. The first gunman stomped toward the counter, scanning for targets. He spotted a figure crouched behind the bar, presumably the cook. Evelyn launched herself forward, catching him off guard with a swift punch to the jaw. He fired a wild shot that shattered a window, sending glass spraying across the diner. Then he went down hard. 2 more cartel members burst in, guns barking. Reyes returned fire, the muzzle flash lighting the dingy interior. Shouts and curses echoed as more bullets tore through tables and shattered plates. Evelyn spotted another attacker flanking them, so she dove low, sweeping his legs out from under him. He crashed with a grunt, but it gave the remaining men time to reposition. Pinning Evelyn and Reyes in a crossfire, Evelyn elbowed Reyes. We can't stay pinned here, she said, nodding toward the narrow hallway at the back. Together, they crawled behind toppled chairs, ignoring the deafening gunfire. Once they reached the hallway, Evelyn kicked open the back door, and both women lunged out into the night. A cartel enforcer rushed around the corner of the building, intercepting them. He swung his handgun up, but Evelyn slammed a kick into his knee, buckling his leg. He collapsed with a harsh cry as she and Reyes sprinted through the parking lot. Behind them, the diner roared with gunshots, glass, and confusion. Evelyn had parked her truck a short distance away. She yanked the door open, Reyes climbing in on the passenger side. Go, Reyes urged, her chest heaving. Evelyn twisted the key, the engine roared, and she floored the gas. One of the cartel's SUVs blocked the exit, so she angled the truck straight at it. A spray of bullets pinged off the trailer's side, but she didn't flinch. The truck smashed into the SUV with a shriek of twisted metal, pushing it aside like a toy. Tires squealed as she veered back onto the road, the diner's neon sign shrinking in her mirror. In the cab, Reyes caught her breath, glancing back at the flicker of muzzle flashes behind them. You see now, it's not just intimidation. They want you and me dead. Evelyn clenched her jaw, leaning forward over the wheel. Then we'll have to strike first. If El Lobo thinks I'm going to run, he's wrong. The truck's engine thundered as they sped into the night, both women acutely aware that any semblance of half measures or caution had just evaporated. The cartel was escalating. El Lobo wouldn't rest until Evelyn was either dead or broken, and as far as Evelyn was concerned, that spelled only one course of action: fight back with everything she had. Two strong-willed combatants, allied by necessity, hurtled down the lonely road, uncertain of what lay ahead, except that they would no longer be alone in this struggle. The stakes had risen, and neither Evelyn Blake nor Olivia Reyes was the type to back down. El Lobo had unleashed a storm, and the time for quiet, solitary defense had passed. Evelyn Blake had never planned on leading a small army, but the events of the past days had forced her into a role far beyond that of an ordinary truck driver. First, there was the shootout on Highway 87, then the brutal murder of Diego Santos, followed by her own violent confrontation at the gas station. Add to that the ambush at the diner with FBI agent Olivia Reyes, and it became clear she couldn't simply keep hauling loads and hope the cartel would leave her alone. The cartel had escalated. Now, she was escalating in return. She reached out to Logan Kane the evening after her narrow escape with Reyes, her hands still shaking slightly from the lingering adrenaline. Logan's response came before she had even finished explaining. I know people, he told her over the phone, his voice low with the confidence of someone who'd faced bigger wars before. Ex-military types like me and you. Some of them have been itching for a chance to make a difference, and I bet a few independent truckers out there wouldn't mind helping shut down the bastards who've been terrorizing them. Evelyn breathed a quiet sigh of relief. She didn't have illusions that half a dozen veterans and a handful of angry truckers could topple an entire cartel. But if they struck at the right place, at the right time, they could cripple El Lobo's operations enough to buy themselves, and everyone else, some peace. Within 48 hours, a small group gathered at a deserted warehouse near the Texas border. Weeds poked through cracks in the concrete floor, and broken windows allowed the wind to whistle through the dilapidated structure. Parked outside were several trucks and a pair of dusty SUVs. Inside, men and women milled about, greeting each other with solemn nods. Among them was Marco Alvarez, a broad-shouldered man with dark hair and a thick beard. He'd served as an explosives specialist in a classified unit. Now he had offered his skills to Evelyn's cause without hesitation. Other veterans stood alongside them, some in worn fatigues, others in jeans and t-shirts. The air hummed with tension and quiet determination. A trio of independent truckers joined as well. Harsh lines etched their faces, men and women who had lost friends or family to cartel violence. One driver, a stocky guy named Billy, recounted how he'd nearly been forced off the road by gunmen a week ago. I'm done running, he declared. If these bastards think they can own the roads, it's time we show them who really does. His words sparked a small chorus of assent. These were folks who'd had enough of living in fear. Evelyn stood at the center of this ragtag assembly, still wearing the practical cargo pants and boots she'd always preferred since her time in the Green Beret. She looked around the circle, Logan with his wiry frame and watchful eyes, Marco cradling a box of detonators, Billy and the other truckers, each carrying the weight of personal loss. Clearing her throat, she began. I can't do this alone, she said simply, glancing at each face. You know the risk. We're going up against Diego El Lobo Ramirez, a man who's got his fingers in everything from dope to politicians' pockets. He's building a shadow empire to control every shipment, every route, and every trucker who refuses to pay him tribute. If we don't stop him now, he'll only get stronger. Her gaze flicked toward Billy. We all know what happens when people try to stand up individually. They get squashed. So let's do this together. They broke into small groups, planning their strategy around a dusty table where Logan spread out a map of Rio Bravo. At the center of the map was their proposed target, the cartel's primary fuel depot. Marco circled it in red marker. They keep millions of gallons of fuel here, he explained, tapping the paper with one thick finger. Trucks come in and out at all hours, distributing gas and diesel across the region. But it's not just fuel for regular stations. Word is they also store contraband shipments and launder money through shell companies. If we blow this place to Kingdom Come, we cost them tens of millions and disrupt their entire logistics chain. Logan folded his arms. We don't just want to level the facility, though. We need intel, proof that El Lobo's been paying off politicians and judges. That means hacking their systems or grabbing their files. Whatever data we can get. He looked to Evelyn. She gave a tight nod. She remembered Reyes's words about needing hard evidence to bring down El Lobo's corrupt ally. If all they did was cause damage, the cartel might rebuild. But if they had data exposing high-level collusion, the FBI could tear down the entire operation. They set the plan in motion. First, Logan proposed dividing their people into 3 main teams. Team 1, Evelyn, Logan, and Marco would infiltrate the facility's control center to extract digital records. Team 2, made of veterans adept at sabotage, would plant charges around the massive fuel tanks. Finally, Team 3, composed of the volunteer truckers, would block the roads, create diversions, and hinder any reinforcements heading to Rio Bravo. Billy cracked his knuckles with grim satisfaction at that part of the plan. He'd already recruited a few drivers who had bulldozers and big rigs capable of forming makeshift barricades. During a break in the planning, Evelyn pulled Marco aside. "I'm going to need something with more punch than my Glock," she said. He opened a heavy crate, revealing an M4 carbine that gleamed under the warehouse's flickering lights. "Modified for close-quarters combat," Marco explained. "Shortened barrel, custom stock, a mounted flashlight. Should serve you well if you end up fighting in tight corridors." Evelyn accepted the weapon, feeling a rush of memories from her days overseas. She wasn't exactly eager to relive combat, but it was comforting to know she'd have the proper tools. When the final details were ironed out, Evelyn addressed the group. Her voice carried through the warehouse. "We're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for every driver, every family these monsters have terrorized. If we knock out their main fuel depot, they'll lose a big piece of their power, and maybe think twice before bullying people who just want to earn an honest living." Nobody clapped or cheered, but in that silence, there was resolve. They all dispersed to make final preparations for a midnight assault. In the pitch-black hours past midnight, the convoy of vehicles moved swiftly toward Rio Bravo. The moon hid behind clouds, granting them the benefit of darkness. Headlights off, they navigated by night vision goggles and the dim glow of the distant city. Evelyn's pulse thudded in her ears as she sat in the lead SUV she had lent her Peterbilt. To Team 3 for road blocking duty. Logan sat beside her, scanning the horizon through binoculars. Marco followed in another vehicle, laden with enough explosives to send half the depot sky high. Tension coiled in the air. At each checkpoint, they waited for a signal from the recon spotters placed early. When it was clear, they slipped through. The roads around Rio Bravo were eerily quiet, though Evelyn sensed watchful eyes in the darkness. They parked a kilometer away from the sprawling facility. Engines off, finishing the approach on foot. Her M4 felt substantial in her hands, a stark reminder that she wasn't just a truck driver anymore. She was stepping onto the battlefield again. The depot itself looked like a small city of steel tanks and industrial equipment. Lit by bright floodlights, trucks rumbled in and out, carrying fuel and who knew what else. Through binoculars, Evelyn spotted armed patrols, but nowhere near as many as she might have expected for a place this vital. She suspected the cartel had grown complacent, or perhaps had focused its security on highways and infiltration rather than direct facility defense. Turning to Logan and Marco, she spoke quietly. "We move fast. Team 1 breaks in, grabs the data from the control room. Team 2 handles the tanks. Team 3 will cause a diversion at the eastern gate. We have to be out before they realize what's happening." Both men nodded. Leading the infiltration, Evelyn guided Logan and Marco along a chain-link fence. Under the cover of darkness, they cut through a section of fencing behind a row of shipping containers. The first guard they encountered never saw them coming. Evelyn slipped behind him, clamped a hand over his mouth, and choked him out before he could raise an alarm. They pressed onward, hearts pounding with each step closer to the heart of the depot. Inside the control center, fluorescent lights glared down on a row of computer terminals. A single guard manned a desk, flipping through a magazine. Logan crept up behind him, pistol at the ready, while Marco keyed in a stolen access card they'd lifted from a bribed worker. The door hissed open, and in less than 10 seconds, they had the guards subdued, zip-tied, and gagged. Evelyn breathed a silent sigh of relief. They'd retained the element of surprise for now. Marco moved to the main console. Plugging a USB drive into the computer, lines of code scrolled across the monitor as he began downloading data. Financial records, shipping manifests, secret bank account details, and lists of powerful individuals on El Lobo's payroll. This would be their trump card. Without these files, the FBI might never prosecute the corrupt officials who shielded El Lobo. Suddenly, an alarm rang out in shrill bursts. On a security feed, Evelyn saw a small group of cartel gunmen approaching from the corridor. They must have found the fence cut, she hissed. Logan shoved a heavy filing cabinet toward the door as makeshift cover, then signaled Evelyn to brace herself. The sound of boots thundered closer. Gunfire erupted, bullets punching through the thin walls. Evelyn fired back, downing two shapes in the hallway. Sparks flew from ricochets, and the overhead lights flickered. Marco's voice cut through the chaos. Almost done. Just a few more seconds. Outside, she could hear Team 2's charges being set around the fuel tanks. If the cartel realized the extent of their plan, they'd swarm. Logan reloaded and shouted over the din. "We have to pull out soon, or we'll be trapped." Evelyn nodded, returning fire whenever the cartel men pressed forward. Then Marco yanked the USB drive free. "Got it. Let's move." They kicked open a side exit and sprinted out into the night. Meanwhile, the second team had placed explosives at strategic points around the bellowing fuel tanks, each charge carefully wired. Gunfire crackled across the yard. Evelyn glimpsed muzzle flashes as more cartel reinforcements poured in, headlights streaking the darkness. She gestured for the group to fall back. To the rendezvous, vehicles roared to life as Team 3 sprang their diversion. A couple of big rigs, led by Billy, blocked the main access road, forcing cartel SUVs to detour. On top of that, Billy's men had scattered nail-studded boards, effectively popping the tires of anyone who tried to rush in. But it wasn't enough to stop El Lobo's personal team. The man himself arrived in a slick black truck, flanked by heavily armed guards wearing tactical gear. Surround them, he barked, pointing at the fleeing silhouettes. The roar of automatic weapons overwhelmed the chaotic scene as bullets zipped through the air. Evelyn ducked behind a shipping container, exchanging fire with a pair of enforcers. Her M4 rattled in her grasp, heart pounding, sweat pouring down her brow. Marco, waiting in cover near the fuel tank valves, triggered a flaming trap they had set in a row of oil drums. Flames whooshed into existence, forming a wall of fire. Several of El Lobo's men recoiled, stumbling back in a bid to avoid being burned alive. El Lobo cursed loudly, furious that his men were being thwarted at every turn. Sensing they had only moments left before the entire compound became overrun, Evelyn raised her voice. "Now, detonate it." Over the radio, one of the veterans confirmed they were clear of the main blast zone. Evelyn squeezed the remote trigger. The ensuing explosion ripped through the night with a deafening roar. Multiple fuel tanks burst in a chain reaction of fire and shrapnel. For an instant, it looked like an artificial sunrise, fiery orange columns surging into the sky, sending tremors through the ground. The shock wave knocked vehicles onto their sides, shattered windows, and flung cartel gunmen to the dirt. El Lobo staggered, shielding his face from the searing heat. The entire facility was transformed into a hellscape of blazing wreckage and thick, rolling smoke. Amid the chaos, Evelyn and her companions scrambled to their vehicles, weaving around debris and dazed attackers. The plan had been to create just enough carnage to cover their escape, and the results surpassed even their most daring expectations. Flames soared into the sky, devouring the warehouse structures, while scattered gunfire fizzled into disorganized bursts as the cartel reeled from the devastation. Finally, Evelyn's SUV smashed through a chain-link gate on the compound's far side, leaving a trail of embers and swirling ash behind. Other team members followed close behind, a ragged convoy speeding into the night. Behind them, El Lobo's enraged howl pierced the roar of flames. "Blake," he screamed, his voice raw with fury. "I'll hunt you down." Evelyn heard the echo of his vow even after they'd driven several miles away. She inhaled deeply, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The entire operation had taken less than an hour, but it would reshape the cartel's empire for months, maybe years. She didn't fool herself into thinking El Lobo's wrath would subside. If anything, he'd pour every resource into seeking vengeance. But she also knew they had what they needed, the data that could expose his network of bribed officials. And with his fuel depot wiped from the map, he would be forced onto the defense. Logan, riding in the passenger seat, cradled the USB drive like a sacred relic. This might just bring him down for good, he said, voice tight with anticipation. Evelyn nodded, gripping the wheel. One step at a time, let's make sure we're alive to see it happen. Headlights flickered in the rear-view mirror, but no one seemed to be following. The horizon glowed faintly from the inferno they'd left behind, a testament to how drastically they had turned. Now it was a war, one that neither side could simply walk away from. Yet Evelyn felt something akin to hope flicker in her chest. She had an army of her own now, and for the first time, El Lobo knew what it meant to be on the losing side of a fight. Evelyn Blake had fully expected retaliation in the wake of the explosion that ripped through the Rio Bravo fuel depot. She knew El Lobo's wrath wouldn't cool. If anything, the catastrophe she'd orchestrated only poured fuel on the fire of his vengeance. Over the following days, as she and her makeshift battalion of truckers and ex-soldiers scrambled between safe houses, the tension in the air grew thicker. Every CB radio crackle could signal an impending assault. Every passing vehicle could carry cartel gunmen, but Evelyn refused to stay hidden. Rather than wait around for El Lobo to corner her, she chose the time and place for a decisive confrontation. It began with a series of encrypted messages passed through Logan Kane and FBI agent Olivia Reyes, carefully staged to leak just enough information to draw El Lobo's interest. The cartel leader still controlled a vast network of informants, but he was also consumed by rage and pride, enough to push him into a trap if the bait seemed convincing. Evelyn planned to lure him into Coyote's Pass, a narrow canyon nestled in the desolate Texas highland. She had scouted it with Logan days earlier, noting the sheer walls and winding curves that would limit large-scale reinforcements. If El Lobo wanted to settle the score personally, Coyote's Pass would become the stage for their final reckoning. Her Peterbilt was parked out of sight, entrusted to a fellow driver she trusted. Instead, she drove a battered SUV borrowed from Marco Alvarez, the seats strewn with leftover gear from their last skirmish. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn received confirmation that El Lobo had taken the bait. The cartel had mobilized, and multiple black SUVs roamed the highways in search of her. She set out toward the canyon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, Evelyn spotted headlights behind her. 2 SUVs, one in each mirror, kept pace with her. She recognized the pattern. They weren't trying to run her off the road yet, merely shadowing her until backup arrived. But she wasn't heading for a random safe house. She was driving straight into the rocky jaws of Coyote's Pass. By the time she turned onto the narrow road leading into the canyon, twilight had given way to darkness. She flicked off her headlights, relying on the moonlight and her memory of the terrain. The canyon walls loomed on either side, ominous and foreboding. The engines behind her grew louder, the cartel drivers accelerating to keep up. She felt that old nod of anticipation coil in her gut, reminiscent of the missions she'd run in Afghanistan. Except this time, there was no command structure, no extraction team waiting on standby. She was the commander of her own destiny. When she glanced in the rearview mirror, she could make out 3 vehicles now, not just 2. Likely El Lobo himself had joined the pursuit. Good. That was precisely what she wanted. She eased off the gas, letting them close in. If they tried to open fire, she'd swerve deeper into the canyon, where the high walls would make ambushes riskier for them too. The wind picked up, howling through the pass like a vengeful spirit. Evelyn steeled herself. This night would end one of 2 ways, with El Lobo dead or captured, or with her buried beneath the canyon dust. A sharp curve lay ahead. She braked, tires skidding on loose gravel as the SUV drifted around the bend. The headlights in her mirror surged closer, and she braced for the worst. Then she saw the flash of high beams. The lead vehicle wanted her to stop, demanded it. Perhaps she simply gripped the wheel, pulse thrumming. "Come and get me," she muttered under her breath. A moment later, a volley of gunfire shattered the night. Bullets pinged off the rear quarter panel of her vehicle, but she didn't slow. Instead, she sped up, hugging the canyon wall so closely. Sparks flew from the metal scraping stone. She needed to draw them in further. She wanted them so deep into Coyote's Pass that retreat became impossible. Then and only then would she turn the tables on them. Eventually, she spotted the pre-arranged marker, a towering rock formation that jutted from the canyon floor, illuminated faintly by the moon. This was her chosen battleground. With a calculated skid, she brought the SUV to a stop, dust swirling in the headlights. She leapt out, M4 carbine slung across her shoulder, though she kept her hands free. If she was going to face El Lobo, she wanted it on terms that would draw him out in person. Sure enough, the pursuing vehicle screeched to a halt. A dozen yards away, headlights casting harsh beams across the rocky terrain. Doors opened and men spilled out, cartel enforcers brandishing assault rifles and shotguns. Two of them parted to make way for their leader, Diego El Lobo Ramirez. He stepped forward, flanked by a pair of bodyguards, the glint of a submachine gun visible in his right hand. Moonlight revealed the livid fury in his eyes. His jaw tight. "Blake," he shouted, voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You run me in circles, blow up my depot, and think you can stand here like some kind of hero." He took a few steps closer, boots grinding against the gravel. "You have no idea what kind of power I wield." Evelyn held her ground. Her M4 dangled from a sling, but she didn't raise it. Instead, she stared him down with the calm poise of a soldier who'd faced real nightmares. "I know exactly how much power you have," she replied, her voice cold. "And I know that without your men, you're nothing but a thug with a grudge." El Lobo narrowed his eye. "You think I won't call all of them to gun you down this instant?" The bodyguards tensed, ready to fire. She shrugged. "You do that and your empire dies with you. We both know you came here to prove you're still in control, to settle this personally. So go ahead, show them what you're made of." Her tone dripped with deliberate provocation. She wanted him angry, impulsive. If he engaged in a firefight, her veteran allies concealed around the canyon might spring into action. But if he chose to fight her in single combat, she could exploit his arrogance. El Lobo's lip curled. He motioned for his men to hold. "Fine," he spat. "I'll tear you apart with my own hands if that's what you want." Tossing his submachine gun to one of the bodyguards, he cracked his neck and advanced. Fists clenched, brimming with lethal intent. Without warning, he lunged, arms swinging in a brutal arc. Evelyn sidestepped, pivoting on her heel, hooking an arm around his elbow to redirect his momentum. He was big and strong, but his technique was raw, fueled by anger rather than skill. She recognized the pattern. This was the same sloppy aggression that had undone him at the depot. He might be a vicious killer, but disciplined martial technique could defeat brute force. El Lobo stumbled, nearly losing his balance on the uneven ground. One of the bodyguards rushed in, apparently unwilling to honor the one-on-one premise. Evelyn spun, catching the guard's wrist and yanking him into a fierce elbow strike to the jaw. He collapsed with a grunt. A second guard attempted to intervene, but with fluid quickness, she kicked his knee out, then delivered a chop to his throat, leaving him gasping on the ground. Now it was just El Lobo and Evelyn. The cartel boss roared in frustration, throwing a barrage of punches. Evelyn deftly dodged, letting his own force work against him. When he overextended on a wide hook, she slipped behind him, smashing her forearm into the back of his neck. He staggered forward, cursing in Spanish. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow. Still, he refused to back down. "You worthless," he began, then lunged again. This time Evelyn met him head-on, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. He howled, forced to his knees by the torque. She delivered a short hammer fist to his shoulder, nearly dislocating it. Slamming an elbow into his spine, she brought him face down onto the gravel, scraping his cheek. He lashed out blindly, managing to catch the calf of her leg, but she jerked back before he could do real damage. They struggled for a moment longer, El Lobo thrashing like a wounded animal. He managed to spin, delivering a desperate strike to her ribs, making her win. She retaliated with a vicious knee to his solar plexus, knocking the breath out of him. Finally, she wrenched him over onto his back. He lay there, panting, nose bleeding, fury and disbelief warring in his gaze. Under the wash of moonlight, Evelyn stood over the battered kingpin. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythms, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She'd vanquished his men with practiced skill, and now the self-proclaimed wolf of Rio Bravo was gasping for air at her feet. One last blow would end him, but that wasn't her plan. Catching her breath, Evelyn spotted El Lobo's handgun in the gravel. She stooped to pick it up, pointing it squarely at his head. He glared up at her, face twisted with pain and hatred, as if daring her to pull the trigger. "Finish it," he spat, coughing up a fleck of blood. "If you think that stops the cartel, you're dumber than I thought." A flicker of memory ghosted through Evelyn's mind. The time she'd been forced to pull a trigger overseas, the cost of taking a life. She exhaled, then lowered the gun. "No," she said quietly, letting the weapon drop from her grip onto the dirt. "Killing you won't fix what you've done." She unclipped a small radio from her belt and pressed the transmit button. "Resai, I have a package for you." Her voice was calm, though her heart still pounded. Moments later, the darkness of the canyon lit up with strobing headlights. A fleet of SUVs and sedans emerged from a side road, FBI vehicles, led by none other than Agent Olivia Rias. Her team had circled around the pass, lying in wait for Evelyn's signal. The rumble of engines reverberated off the canyon walls as they closed in. A handful of cartel men, who remained standing, scrambled to run, only to find themselves at gunpoint from federal agents. El Lobo tried to rise, but Evelyn planted a foot on his chest, pinning him down. His eyes darted frantically, like a cornered predator. "You think I'm the only one?" he growled. "Hundreds more will rise in my place. You've done nothing but start a bigger war." "Maybe," Evelyn allowed, "or maybe they'll see what happened to you. Maybe they'll learn to fear the people they thought they could crush." FBI agents converged, cuffing cartel enforcers left and right. Riaz strode over, her Glock at the ready, scanning the scene with cool efficiency. When she reached Evelyn, she regarded the beaten kingpin at her feet. "You actually did it," she murmured. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't surprised." Evelyn stepped back, letting Riaz's men yank El Lobo to his feet. He flailed, cursing in English and Spanish alike, spitting threats about how the cartel would avenge him. The FBI agents remained stoic, ignoring his rage. "We have enough evidence now," Riaz said, tapping a folder in her hand. "Between the data you recovered at the depot and the other intel we've gathered, the entire network is coming down." El Lobo locked eyes with Evelyn one last time, a mixture of hatred and grudging respect swirling in his glare. "You've declared war on something bigger than you can imagine," he hissed. "This isn't over," she offered a thin, cold smile. "It is for you." As he was dragged away into a waiting SUV, Evelyn exhaled the tension coiled in her muscles. For the first time in weeks, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The man who had declared her his mortal enemy was now in handcuffs. The canyon echoed with the sound of slamming car doors, radio chatter, and the subdued moans of battered cartel thugs. She closed her eyes, letting the dust-laden breeze brush over her face. She'd chosen not to pull the trigger, and that decision felt right. Killing El Lobo might have fed revenge, but delivering him to face justice had the potential to break the entire system he'd built. When dawn finally broke over Coyote's Pass, the cartel leader was on his way to a high-security facility, and Evelyn stood on a ridge overlooking the desert. She couldn't see the FBI convoy now, but she could imagine the swirl of official paperwork, the high-profile arrests that would soon rock every corrupt politician tied to El Lobo. The war was not entirely finished. Cartels had a way of regenerating, but this victory was sizable. The entire region felt a shift, a chance to reclaim the roads and routes that had once been terrorized into submission. News spread rapidly. By the time Evelyn returned to more populated areas, she discovered that federal raids had commenced throughout the state. Following El Lobo's downfall, the FBI and local authorities mobilized to dismantle the remaining cells of the cartel. Over 100 arrests were made in the first 48 hours alone, from top lieutenants to small-time enforcers. Warehouses that once stored drugs, contraband, or laundered money were either seized or shuttered. Gas stations known to be complicit in extortion were closed pending investigation. For the first time in years, independent truckers felt a tangible release from fear. With so many cartel operatives behind bars, the routine shakedowns ended overnight. Routes that had been declared off-limits by the cartel were opened again. A few drivers remained nervous, certain a new faction might emerge to fill the power vacuum. But as they watched the barricades come down and the chain-link fences around illicit checkpoints get torn away, a cautious optimism took root. Evelyn heard the stories while passing through truck stops. Small operators who had given up were now returning, dusting off their rigs, reclaiming their old routes. Freight companies that had been forced to pay bribes saw an immediate drop in special fees, easing their financial burden. Even local diners reported business picking up, as drivers felt free to stop and rest without scanning the parking lot for suspicious SUVs. The wave of liberation washed across multiple states, proving that El Lobo's shadow empire depended heavily on his personal reign of terror. A new solidarity emerged among the drivers who had survived the cartel's reign. Words circulated about establishing a more formal network to protect their own. A system of early warnings on the CB radio, a volunteer watch program for smaller routes, over coffee at a roadside diner. A group of truckers discussed ways to coordinate with local law enforcement, ensuring that any suspicious activity would be reported fast. The lesson was clear. When drivers communicated and stood together, they became a force that even a cartel would struggle to subdue. Some trucking associations, emboldened by El Lobo's arrest, scheduled meetings with state representatives to demand better highway security. They proposed more frequent patrols along remote stretches and stricter background checks for new trucking companies, reducing the chances that a cartel front could spring up again. The old intimidation tactics that once kept everyone in line no longer worked. Though plenty of drivers remained cautious, the gloom that had shrouded them was lifting. Evelyn passed several newly freed routes, observing how the roads teemed with life again. Without the fear of being hijacked or shot, commerce boomed. Warehouses and distribution centers bustled with activity. A sense of relief tinged the air, as though an oppressive weight had finally vanished. Even so, quiet murmurs reminded everyone that other cartels might try to seize territory. But this time, the trucking community vowed to respond swiftly and collectively. They had learned the price of silence. One afternoon, Evelyn stopped at a once-abandoned truck lot, noticing a familiar face amid the crowd of drivers. Javier Santos, now nearly 18, stood beside his late father's old rig. Pride and sorrow mingled in his expression as he ran a hand across the chipped paint of the truck's cab. It had been Diego Santos' dream to someday run a small fleet, but the cartel's brutality cut that ambition short. Now, with the roads opening again, Javier intended to pick up where his father left off. Evelyn approached, heart twinging at the sight of the young man. He looked up with a determined spark in his eyes. "My dad always told me that a real truck driver doesn't just haul freight," he said softly. "He protects the roads for others. Too, thanks to you, I actually get to honor that." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll do great, Javier, just keep remembering why you're out here," he smiled, gripping the keys to his father's rig. Though the memory of Diego's murder would never fully fade, it had fueled a drive in Javier to be more than just a driver, but a guardian of the highways, ensuring no one else would have to face the same nightmare. In the wake of the cartel's collapse, reporters clamored for interviews with the mysterious female trucker who had played a pivotal role. Government officials floated the idea of awarding her a Medal of Courage, while local talk shows debated how a single woman could take on an entire criminal empire. Evelyn wanted no part of it. She slipped away from cameras and microphones, turning down the offers of accolade. "I just did what was necessary," as she would say whenever someone pushed her for a statement. No more, no less. Instead of basking in fame, she quietly returned to the life she knew, hauling loads across America's vast highways. This time, though, she carried with her a new sense of ease. The roads felt safer now, and she had fewer reasons to glance over her shoulder. That old soldier's vigilance never vanished entirely, but she allowed herself the smallest luxury of trust in the progress they had made. In truck stops and roadside diners across the country, word of Evelyn Blake began to spread. Veterans of the trade recounted how she stood up to a cartel that had terrorized them for years, culminating in a final confrontation that ended with El Lobo's arrest. Newer drivers heard the tales over the CB radio, often embellished but never belittled. Some swore they had seen her black Peterbilt roaring past on moonlit nights, a silent guardian of the highway. If you spot a tall woman behind the wheel of an old rig with bulletproof windows, older drivers would say, "Watch out, you might be looking at the lady who took down a cartel." For Evelyn, these whispers were unnecessary praise. She drove on, fulfilling deliveries as she always had. Sometimes she caught pieces of conversation on the radio. Stories of an unstoppable woman who'd fought cartels like it was nothing. On those occasions, a faint smile would tug at her lips. She would push the mic button just long enough to say something casual, then release it, letting the legends grow on their own. The roads had been a battleground, but they also served as her sanctuary. Now with El Lobo locked up and his criminal empire in ruins, she could finally enjoy a measure of peace. Even if the next threat rose from the ashes, Evelyn Blake would be ready. She was, after all, a former Green Beret, one who had proven that even the mightiest cartels could be driven back by the sheer resolve of a single truck driver who refused to surrender her freedom. And so she kept driving, forging ahead into the horizon, a quiet guardian on America's highways. Her story lived on in the voices of those whose livelihoods she had helped save, an enduring testament to the power of standing one's ground against impossible odds and winning. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out, hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. At night, Harper would lie awake in her cab, replaying every moment of the ambush. Not with fear, but with analysis. Planning, waiting, like a wolf eyeing the edge of the campfire. Diego Mendez thought he controlled the road, but he hadn't met someone like Harper Quinn, someone who didn't just fight back, but made every strike count with deadly precision. At night, Harper would lie awake in her cab, replaying every moment of the ambush. Not with fear, but with analysis. Planning, waiting, like a wolf eyeing the edge of the campfire. Officer Salazar later filed the report quietly, but he knew this story would live in whispers, the lone trucker who stood her ground when even armed men backed down. Harper stood silent in the desert wind, memories of her unit echoing in the emptiness. The weight of her past missions bore down on her shoulders, but her eyes held the calm of someone who had faced far worse.